neoliberal economic policies for the entire party systems. So why, just bear with me. So what we are trying to investigate here, the partisan coalitions, how the implementation of new economic or market-oriented reforms actually pushed labor-backed parties that previously supported, these populist calls to shift their coalitional policies, and how they repositioned themselves programmatically in order to implement these liberalization or economic liberalization reforms, and how they shifted, their brands and the effect of this brand dilution and economic performance on the endurance or stability or breakdown of different political parties in the region. So when why it's puzzling, because over the course of the since like the early or the mid 1990s until the mid until 2005, 2006, some like well-established political parties totally collapsed, as it happened in Venezuela with the Democratic Action Party and the Social Christian Party, and in Bolivia with the emergence of Morales and his movement, his party movement towards socialism. He actually put an end to the well-established three parties: the National Revolutionary Movement and the Leftist Revolutionary Movement and the National Democratic Action Party. In Peru, as I mentioned last week, the three parties that actually had existence since the early 20th century, like Aprista and later the United Left and the Popular Action Party, totally disappeared in 1991 with the emergence of an outsider, Fujimori, and his reach to power. And in Ecuador as well, the democratic, the leftist forces and Roldistas and the Social Christian Party actually totally disappeared, and this gave way to Correa and his populist alliance to gain to strike roots in society, and actually to put an end to even chaotic, this party system, but he put an end to old political parties. And that was like countries with total where political parties totally collapsed in these countries. But in other countries, it was like a kind of a slow erosion of the existing party system, that actually old parties disappeared, but the other ones kept the entire system from collapsing, as it happened in Argentina. Like the civic or the radicals actually totally disappeared in 2003. But the Peronist proved a degree of resilience, so that's why it kept the entire system from collapsing. And in Costa Rica as well, the Social Christian Party totally disappeared, but the existence of the Liberation Party kept some sort of balance, and kept the entire party from sliding, to the populist appeal or to the entire, populist call to gain hold in society. So it was like that was with the implications of new economic policies. So that's why for in the literature, actually, the consider, scholars consider this as critical juncture that shaped the entire party system in the region. And why again it's puzzling, because labor-based parties, or the political parties that previously supported by labor unions and labor movements, they actually made this policy shift or this turnaround in order to to put an end to these populist calls and far-reaching redistributive policies and the implementation of this, or to give way to market forces in order to shape the economic activities. So with this shift, like the old or their populist constituencies actually had some sort of reaction. So in some countries, these popular movements or popular forces led kind of active resistance to these policies, but in other countries, it was like totally politically acquiescent to these policies. So literature or many studies focused on the identifying the main players or the main actors who led or who took the lead in implementing these economic policies. Old parties that actually that previously supported labor movement, and they had these kind of populist appeal, or conservative actors that they had like this pro-business inclinations, and this with the existence of some leftist opposition that somehow reshaped the electoral dynamics and the competitive alliances in these countries. So we need to in order to investigate this issue of reshaping party system, or the impact of neoliberal policies on the entire party system, and why it led to different trajectories from total collapse to slow erosion to through slow erosion to the complete or degree of resilient or endurance of some or of old political parties. So we have like three main perspectives. The first one, or the departure point, still like who led the college, who led like the market reform measures, who took the lead in implementing these policies. So Murillo, for example, focused on partisan coalitions, and with the special focus on this labor-packed or labor-based parties, how these political forces, how like labor-based parties initiated these or made this shift to the right, and subsequently they had to reshape their partisan coalitions, but by focusing mainly on these parties and how they interacted with trade unions, this union government relations. She actually came up with this kind of typology in order to investigate different trajectories of union government relations. And Kenneth Roberts as well, he mentioned something about this programmatic repositioning of different parties, but like he broadened the focus from he didn't focus mainly or only on labor-based parties. He focused also on conservative actors who led the implementation of the reform package. And then Lupo, he focused on this brand dilution and economic performance, and how they combine together like this kind of how political parties actually abandoned their old brands, and with poor economic performance, that would account for a total or the entire collapse of some political parties, especially he focused mainly on Argentina and Venezuela. So we have like three main perspectives in order to investigate the impact of neoliberalism on party system, from like this narrow focus mainly on or only on exclusively on labor-based parties, and then programmatic repositioning of different political parties, and then this kind of brand dilution and variation in economic performance in different countries. So we start out with this union government relations by focusing mainly on labor-packed parties. And she actually implemented or investigated thoroughly three main countries, the union government relations in three main countries: Mexico, Argentina, and Venezuela. Logically, labor-packed parties had some sort of advantage in implementation of in this implementation of new economic policies. Ideologically, they had this ideological credential that they didn't belong, or they were not affiliated with the right because of their populist legacy. But that was like the outsource the kind of outsourcing the blame, or placing the blame on fiscal deficit and foreign debts, and this kind of severe economic crisis that actually obliged them in order to obliged them to implement these economic policies. So that was out of economic imperatives, or because of the urgency of the economic crisis, but not necessarily because they genuinely believed in these ideological turn, or ideological shift. So in a way or another, they had some sort of advantage by reaching out to their social constituencies in order to convince them, or to have like this kind of mutual deal in order to make this policy switch. But the flip side of this is, again, because of this populist legacy, they had to cultivate support from the business group or the business associations as well, because they were kind of distrustful. They had this kind of distrust towards old populist leaders making, this policy turnaround. So they had to shift their coalitional politics or coalitional basis in order to implement these new policies. And the reaction of trade unions or populist sector was essential, and actually determined, to what extent these coalitional shifts succeeded or led to a total demise of these new coalitional politics. So by making this kind of partisan shift or partisan coalition, this led to emergence of new partisan identities as well in some countries. Because of the implementation of these neoliberal policies led to some sort of rise of some critics. People or some political forces became widely critical of these economic policies, and this shifted the electoral dynamics with the emergence of new political opposition or new contenders that shifted, the landscape, the political landscape, or the electoral or the competitive dynamics. So with the emergence of new political forces or new political parties competing for control, to have control over different trade unions or different workers' confederations, this led to availability of some political forces or plurality in the existence of political forces with some sort of different agenda of institutional reform. So this, strategically speaking, pushed all parties in order to shift or to broaden their coalition in order to integrate not only business associations, but they had to appease or to alleviate, the anger or the fears of old forces, like the old popular sector or their old social constituents. So by broadening, seeking, aiming to broaden, their coalitional basis, so the political stand or the reaction of trade unions and labor was essential in determining to what extent this coalition would be successful or would would fail, or because of the turned to different political parties or newly emerging forces in order to form new partisan identity and to reshape the entire party system. So actually, it was not that automatic or straightforward that labor-based parties had some sort of advantage when it comes to implementation of neoliberal policies, because this didn't account for variation in labor reaction and the government interaction with these with trade unions or with union leaders. So the variation in this union-government relations, like shedding light on this variation in union-government relations, is very important in order to investigate, the different trajectories, why some unions led active resistance and while others resorted to political compliance or passive acquiescence. So with the active resistance, like in Venezuela, the Workers' Confederation, they broke with this long tradition of labor peace or peaceful relationship with the government since the return of competitive politics in 1958. And they halted, or they actually organized some militant actions and strikes that actually precluded or disrupted, the government, the productivity and the governance in some economic sectors. Teachers unions in Argentina as well. If you compare this to teachers union in Mexico, for example, in Argentina they led several strikes in order to preclude the implementation of decentralization program or devolution of power to to local level or to local governments. But in Mexico, actually the government or the one dominant party managed to have some sort of collaboration or cooperation with the teachers union there that didn't actually they didn't lead any disruptive or organized contentious action in order to prevent the implementation of decentralization policies. So the level of the militancy or the decision to lead active resistance or to restrain, and then and subsequently the government reaction by offering or rewarding, this kind of behavior of trade unions by offering concessions or not offering concessions, this kind of variation in union-government relations, the variations deserve some sort of deep investigation. So what Murillo tried to do here is offering, this multi-level analysis by not only focusing on this systematic or systemic variables on this system level or macro level, but turning the focus to these organizational dynamics, what was actually going on inside trade unions, or the organizational capacity or the orientation of political the union leadership and the competition between different union leadership and their relation or affiliation or partisan affiliation or the relation with different political parties. And the national context or this kind of macro level offers the context within which these organizational dynamics occurred, and it defined as well the national trend or the pattern of the interaction between union and government. So in order to explain these interaction between unions and government, and the variation or the different trajectories between these or different policies and different actions actually stemmed from different patterns of interaction between trade unions and governments. So what kind of, in order to explain, these interactions, we need to focus on the incentive or the incentive structure that pushed the various, several governments to offer concessions and trade unions to opt for militancy or acquiescence. So militancy meaning organizing, collective action or collective behavior that actually aims at disrupting productivity and governance in particular economic sectors, in order to get some sort of concessions from the government. So she focused mainly on three main incentives in order to investigate this different patterns of interaction between trade unions and national governments. So the first variable or the first incentive is partisan loyalty. So the if labor unions they were like actually loyal to their political parties, they had like this strong partisan affiliation, so this would facilitate this policy switch, or like the facilitate cooperation, or restrain this kind of cooperation and push their rank and file or militants to usher in some disruptive behavior. Just bear with me for a minute. So the first incentive is partisan loyalty. So you need to focus on which party was in power during the implementation of these new economic policies. So if labor-based party or labor pegged party was in power, so the relationship with the trade unions was essential in order to go ahead or to proceed with these economic reforms. This would facilitate or restrain cooperation, as I mentioned, but it all depended on the degree of trust. So if trade unions, they did trust they had some sort of trust with their political party, so this would facilitate this ideological shift or this economic shift, and they didn't need to resort to strikes in order to either probe the strength of the firms or the government in order to offer the concessions, or only to bluff in order to pretend to project some sort of a strength in order to get some sort of benefits or concessions as well from national governments. So if they really trusted their political party, which was in power during the implementation of neoliberal economic policies, so they didn't need to resort to any contentious or disruptive behavior. But again, if the uncertainty level about the outcomes of these policies was really high, to the extent that it might be contradictory with the constituents' demands, so the unions leaders they had to investigate, what kind of whether or not they had other competitors, like the leadership competition, the competition between different leaders with different partisan affiliation, or they had to investigate what kind of incentive would they had with the national government in order to get more concessions. So partisan loyalty is important, but it's not like a sufficient condition in order to guide union leaders or trade union leaders in order to actively resist or passively comply with new economic policies. So with the leadership competition here, they need to, if like you need to map out, or political leaders actually before taking decision whether or not resisting or challenging the existing government while implementing the new economic policies, so they had to investigate whether other union leaders competing with them affiliate, and they had like some sort of affiliation with different political parties, or even there existed some sort of internal factions within the ruling party that it carried some sort of potential of forming different political party that would join the political opposition to the existing government. So like the landscape of political competition, or the interaction between different political parties and the affiliation of different union leaders with different political parties uh, was an essential or important variable as well. Because in this case, if there is kind of competition between different leaders, so the existing one uh, wouldn't rationally wouldn't or strategically wouldn't run the risk of being displaced by a different union leader. So in this way he might opt for mobilizing rank and file or mobilizing militants and adopting this like disruptive tactics in order to claim the representation of the workers or to respond to their political demands. Because in this case, if there is kind of a fierce competition between different union leaders affiliated with different political parties, so they might be displaced or they might be fired or replaced by different different union leader, that they would claim their representation for rank and file or like the basis or the union basis of and the workers' demand. They responded more to workers' demands instead of supporting or um, offering some sort of passive compliance to the neoliberal policies. So that happened with the monopoly of power in Mexico, for example, like the predominated the entire political landscape, and that's why the union leaders they didn't face any kind of vehement competition from different leaders. They had only like um, one political party, and different leaders they had to affiliate with this political party in order to gain economic concessions or material benefits in return. So that's why they had, in a way or another, to cooperate with the pre-government in order to get these concessions. While in Venezuela, for example, this kind of plurality between or the availability of different political parties or different competitive alliances pushed or offered some sort of incentive to union leaders to adopt different tactics or hostile tactics in order to gain material concessions or in order to pressure the national government and to get some material concessions. And then union competition as well is like a third pillar in this incentive structure. So if there was kind of competition between different unions in order to represent workers, so in different sectors you have more than like one union claiming representation of workers, as it happened with teachers union in Venezuela, for example. They had like roughly according to Murillo like 13 unions. In Mexico it was only one represented teachers there. So this would preclude collective or collective action by there would be kind of a coordination problem between different, if you have like different players or different trade unions or different unions claiming representation of particular sector, the coordination problem would be very high because it would be like roughly difficult in order to coordinate efforts between different players, and this led to fragmentation of trade unions in this sector, and this weakened their organizational capacity in order to pressure the government to offer some sort of concession. And most probably the government wouldn't offer any sort of concession to weak trade unions or national they didn't have the ability, the organizational capacities to sustain or to coordinate concerted action in order to push or to oblige the government to offer these concessions. And subsequently, the government had no incentive to offer these concessions to weak unions. And Murillo actually focused on 5 main sectors in these 3 countries, like automobile, oil, education, telecommunication, and electricity. And she focused on this kind of incentive structure in order to map out, to come up with this classification about union-government relations. And she came up with 4 main strategies. successful militancy, unsuccessful militancy. This would represent opposition or resistance. And successful restraints with the cooperation between government and unions, and unsuccessful restraints with some sort of subordination of unions to the government. And the scope conditions that would allow for or would like guarantee this kind of different outcomes or account for these different outcomes with the opposition unsuccessful militancy here. If there is kind of partisan competition, so you have like the political landscape is there are some sort of different or availability of different competitive alliances or different competitive alignments, and with union monopoly, like one union or a union monopolized the representation of workers. So in this case, in order to increase, their bargaining leverage, so union leaders would opt for contentious and disruptive tactics, and they would seek alliance with different political opposition in order to get, some sort of concessions and to improve their material conditions. Unsuccessful militancy here, like if there is kind of overlap competition with the partisan competition and union competition. So a union competition would weaken the organizational capacity and would preclude effective, collective action and increased, this kind of coordination, increased difficulties of coordination between different unions, but with the availability of different political opposition forces or different contenders electorally, so different different union leaders would resort to these political opposition in order to increase their bargaining leverage, and they would diversify their tactics in order to resist the existing government implementing these new economic or neoliberal economic policies. So the successful restraints, these kind of, so trade unions or union leaders opted for complying or conforming to the new policy turn or policy switch by cooperating with the existing government. So there, in this case, it's much more likely to happen within this national context of no partisan or union competition, when there is kind of a monopoly of power of a particular party, and like one federation or confederation represented, workers in particular sector. So this would increase the bargaining leverage of union leaders in order to cooperate or to coordinate with the existing party in order to get some sort of concessions or compensations for the implementation of the new harsh austerity measures or deregulation program. Unsuccessful restraints, it was totally like subordination, like when there is kind of union competition, there is kind of fragmentation and weak organizational capacity and atomization of different trade unions, and in a context of political monopoly, one party monopolized power. So this would weaken, the bargaining position of union leaders anyway, and the government had no incentive to offer, any sort of compensation or material concessions for weak trade unions or weak unions. And most probably the government would reward, for like unions who or union leaders who assured some sort of compliance to the government new policies without any sort of electoral threat or electoral competition. So the best trajectory or the strategic tactics, that union leaders would deploy is like totally passive acquiescence to the new policy turn, and the government most probably wouldn't offer any sort of concession or rewards to challenging unions. So based on this incentive structures, and there there's kind of a typology of the strategies adopted by different unions, and this kind of interaction between depending on the national context and the pattern of the union government relations. So we have here, so the second perspective here is this programmatic restructuring or repositioning that shifted or reshaped this partisan competition and subsequently the entire party system. So Kenneth Roberts here, he adopted the same departure points, still the same, who initiated the reform by identifying the main protagonist of market reform measures in different countries. But the focus here, or the scope here, is broader. So instead of focusing mainly on like the labor-packed parties, as like Maria did with her investigation in Mexico, Venezuela, and Argentina, that like the populist leaders, or the labor part, the parties that the actually had strong ties with trade unions and labor movements, made this policy turnaround. But here the focus not only on labor-based parties, but also like the pro-business conservative forces that actually ushered in this market-oriented policies or market-oriented reforms. So it's either like leftist or like old populist forces veered to the right in order to implement these reform like these reform policies. In this case, they actually led to this kind of programmatic de-alignment by shifting from their making this shift from old focus or the traditional focus on social and economic redistribution, and then they focus on this stabilization and deregulation problems. And this actually opened the space or the way or give way to different vulnerable outcomes in the aftermath of the implementation of the readjustment policies, in a sense of like rising social movements or protest movements, or giving way to outsider or anti-neoliberal outsiders, or radical leftist forces. So this programmatic de-alignment showed some degree of vulnerability, especially in countries where leftist forces led these neoliberal shift or this policy switch. In countries that brew business, or conservative elements or conservative actors that led or they implemented or initiated these reform measures, with the existence of some leftist opposition, so they had some sort of firm oppositional stand. And they actually managed to the interaction or the competition between these two forces stabilize the party system, and they managed to introduce some sort of competitive alignment or programmatic alignment in these countries, with some conservative elements, led this neoliberal reform measures and the existence of leftist opposition. So the voters or like citizens, they had other viable political alternative to turn to in case of they didn't like this policy platform or this political alternative. So they had other political force or political opposition that actually competing with the existing the existing forces, but actually they opposed their policy platform, and they introduced different policy program, and that's why the entire party system was stabilized with the existence of this competitive and programmatic alignment. So what's the issue again is variation in strength and stability of party system, from entire collapse, as I mentioned, in Venezuela, Peru, Bolivia, Ecuador, and Colombia, and slow erosion in Costa Rica and Argentina with the disappearance of all the political parties, and like endurance of some other. And like the entire party system or the old parties endured and proved some degree of resilience in Uruguay, Chile, and the Dominican Republic, and the party system became even more institutionalized in Mexico and Brazil. So by investigating or looking into this programmatic restructuring or repositioning of different political parties that gave rise to different political actors in some countries, and led to like this programmatic de-alignment in other countries, led to or undermined their social basis, and eventually led to their entire collapse and gave way to political outsiders or more radical policy platform to gain hold in these societies. By focusing or investigating this programmatic restructuring, this would help us account for variation in stability and party breakdown in different countries in the region. So what's the central point here is the political dynamics actually condition how party system responded to challenges or absorbed these challenges in the aftermath of stabilization and structural adjustment, the implementation of the structural adjustment programs. So the ways political parties repositioned themselves and conditioned this kind of he adopted, Roberts here adopted, when we talked about this critical juncture framework in week 2, he adopted the same framework, like these kind of critical juncture that like political leaders face different choices, and the choices made at this critical moment was consequential for different political developments in the region, and this in the reactive sequence stage with this kind of backlash and transformation, the initial response or the initial choice of programmatic repositioning affected how party system absorbed or responded to these reactive consequences, at this stage, how they responded to social protest, how they responded to the emergence of outsiders or more radical forces or more conservative parties that actually in some countries they totally disappeared, like traditional leftist forces or traditional conservative elements totally disappeared, as it happened in Colombia, for example. The Uribe coalition in 2002 put an end to the two traditional conservative and liberal parties. And for outsiders, as it happened with the Chavez in Venezuela, and more radical left, people would consider Morales as an outsider, but he actually came from within the political dynamics before he assumed office or reached power in 2005. He actually led some sort of, he was like a parliamentary a candidate, and he actually played, played politics from within, or challenged, politics from within, and he led some sort of extra institutional opposition or extra institutional protest as well. So, like the initial response or the initial reaction to this neoliberal turn, how political parties aligned themselves or de-aligned with themselves programmatically with the new reform package or new reform measures. This determined or conditioned, their ability to absorb or these kind of transformations and backlash against market reform measures in the aftermath period. So with this programmatic alignment, So the main focus here is still like who led, these reforms, and whether or not these political forces or political actors developed some sort of coherent stand on main issues that actually divided voters. So they had like, some sort of coherent policy regarding, how to respond to hyperinflation policies, how to deal with the fiscal deficit, how to make sure about, this debt service payment. So they had like, this coherent stand, and they developed, some sort of coherent policy program, and they presented, their policy platform or policy programs to voters, and they developed some sort, or they did recast their ties with their social constituencies based on these programmatic ties. So that happened actually in Brazil, Uruguay, and Mexico. Mexico actually shifted from, as I'm going to see, this kind of de-alignment or this oscillation between old policies and old policies of distribution and cooptation and with their corporate sectors, to new programmatic, alignment, especially in the late 80s, early 90s. So with this kind of programmatic alignment, political forces, they had some sort of coherent program, coherent stand, and they re-established their ties based on these programmatic links or programmatic ties with their electoral constituencies. So in Uruguay, for example, with the Frente Amplio representing some sort of leftist inclination, they offered, the like candidates or politicians, affiliated with the front. They actually introduced different program that differentiated themselves from Blancos and Colorados. They like the long dominated political parties there, and the emergence of the Frente Amplio, like actually led to some sort of programmatic, alignment there in Uruguay, and prevented, the entire, or kept the entire system from collapsing as it happened elsewhere in the region. In Brazil, like the Labor Party as well, introduced some sort of different policy program, and this competitive alignment between different political forces representing, the right, the left, and right, stabilized or institutionalized the entire party system. Mexico as well, with the pre-introducing these economic reform measures and shifting, the coalition towards, business association, led to some sort of internal factions or defections from the dominant party, and the emergence of the Democratic Revolutionary Party led by PRD, led by Cardenas in the late 80s. And this led to different, shaped the landscape of political competition between the PRI, the PAN, and the PRD, as I previously mentioned in last weeks. And with the program, I would single out Mexico in order to investigate it in some detail. And with this programmatic de-alignment, some political forces, they campaigned on particular policy program only to backtrack on this electoral promises while reaching power. So what Roberts actually called bait and switch tactic, like campaigning on particular policies, and people did cast a vote for a particular candidate because of their electoral promises, only to find, them backtracking on these policy programs while after reaching power, like making like a complete policy turnaround after reaching power. This led to some sort of inconsistencies, and left the entire party system vulnerable to radical transformation, as it happened in cases where political outsiders actually eliminated the old or traditional powers and re-established their electoral ties, or re-established populist ties with the wide masses or the wide social constituencies. I would single out Venezuela and Argentina in order to investigate in some detail how this kind of programmatic de-alignment led to a total collapse in Venezuela and of the party system, and slow erosion of party system in Argentina. And we talked already about Peru and under Fujimori last week, and we will defer the story about Bolivia and Ecuador in the week when we address, you know, the indigenous or the like ethnic movements or ethnic mobilization, and how like indigenous people mobilization led to kind of reshaping of the party system. The third strategy of this programmatic repositioning, what Roberts called technocratic convergence. There is no kind of ideological differentiation whatsoever between existing political parties. Like you cannot make any sort of distinction between conservative and leftist forces. That happened with the liberal. With the liberal forces leading, you know, this kind of programmatic shift or policy shift in Colombia, and the conservative party had no sort of distinct or differentiated program from the liberals. So you cannot distinguish between different policy programs of the liberals and conservatives. In Paraguay as well, with the Colorado initiated, you know, this policy shift, it didn't like the other party, the Liberal Party, also represented, you know, this or believed in this kind of market-oriented reforms. So one cannot speak of any kind of ideological differentiation between the existing political forces or the existing traditional parties, and the Dominican Republic as well, with this kind of no kind of ideological differentiation between different political parties. As we're going, I would single out the Dominican Republic to investigate much more thoroughly, by showing how this different center left and leftist forces migrated to the center right, and they converged on with the conservative party. They had, you know, this pact in order to converge on the center right. So this eliminated any sort of ideological distinction or ideological differentiation between political parties. So while, you know, this ideological convergence led to the elimination of or the disappearance of old conservative elements or conservative forces in Colombia with the rise of RIPE coalition, the Dominican Republic and Paraguay actually proved some sort or exhibited some sort of continuity with the existing political parties, except for a short period of the emergence of political outsider in Paraguay. The Dominican Republic, actually the existing political parties or the political landscape was totally closed off, or the barriers of political admission of different political forces or different political parties have been really high, and the different, you know, the fragmentation, different factors or combination of clientelistic ties and fragmentation of popular sector guaranteed this continuity of the traditional forces. So like these kind of programmatic repositioning or programmatic restructuring across different countries in the region had different trajectories or repercussions or implications for the stability or instability of the entire party system. So with the programmatic alignment, we will see how this programmatic alignment stabilized the party system in Mexico. And then the programmatic de-alignment or the technocratic or ideological convergence, these are the labels Roberts actually used, but Lupo mentioned this kind of brand dilution in Latin America. It refers to this programmatic, de-alignment and ideological convergence in these countries. So with programmatic de-alignment, we will focus on Venezuela and Argentina next lecture when when we explain in some detail what Lupo actually meant by party brand and economic performance, that led to a breakdown of particular parties in the region by focusing mainly on Venezuela and Argentina. And then the technocratic or ideological convergence, we will investigate the Dominican Republic in some detail this lecture. So with Mexico, with this kind of programmatic alignment, so from Mexico actually moved from this initial period of the alignment or like the vacillation between different policy programs, especially under Portillo and de la Madrid, and then Salinas managed to stabilize or to introduce some sort of reform measures, and actually Zedillo complemented or continued with the same policy program. It was like a risky reform package that had uncertain, or unintended, consequences for the entire party, for the entire not only party system but the entire political system, that opened up some space for political competition or other political parties to change or to reshape the competitive alignment. But anyway, this kind of programmatic alignment managed to stabilize the entire party system and to give way to this competitive alignment between different political forces. So what actually enabled the PRI or the Institutional Revolutionary Party there, the one dominant party there, to implement these unpopular reforms, that it was like it had like this kind of institutional advantage or institutional properties that actually helped the elites to go ahead with these like harsh economic reform measures. So the centralization of as Haggard and Kaufman mentioned, this kind of centralization, the main feature of the party system, was essential in implementing or insulating the bureaucratic apparatuses from any sort of social pressures. So this centralization of power enabled the PRI to implement these harsh economic measures. So the PRI didn't suffer, especially like during the 80s, didn't suffer any kind of fragmentation or polarization from within the party. Some division between like old guards and pro-democracy or pro-reform movements, it did exist, but it didn't actually reach the point of no return, even with the defection of the Cardenistas and the formation of the PRD. So the PRI remained, proved its endurance or resilience, and remained unfragmented and unpolarized, and managed to make this coalitional this shift to the pro-business coalition, while re-establishing its clientelistic ties with with social bases or social constituencies, especially in areas that the PRI faced some electoral threat from political opposition. Again, like as I mentioned before, like the PRI actually dominated the political scene, but the recruitment policies and this kind of sexenio that it's only like the president had to serve only for one term, it precluded any kind of concentration of power or personalization of power, and the very existence of efficient, financial bureaucratic, enclaves, as an efficient bureaucratic, enclave inside Mexico, and the existence of powerful business associations there facilitated or lubricated, in a way or another, this policy switch and this establishment or stabilizing, this kind of competitive pattern of programmatic alignment. So these kind of risk reforms, it had some sort of unpredictable competitive dynamics, or unpredictable, or it was very difficult to anticipate, what kind of political implications these market reform policies would have had before the implementation, and this led to the emergence of the new political party representing, the left, the PRD, the Democratic Revolutionary Party, and this led to the reshape the political or the competitive landscape between the pre-PAN and PRD. So this stabilized the entire party system in a way or another, and allowed for this peaceful alternation of power. For the Dominican Republic here, it's a crucial case because of this ideological convergence. It didn't give way to great social upheaval as it happened in Venezuela, that eventually led to the emergence of an outsider or Chavez, to led Chavez to take over, to reach power actually in 1998. So it didn't give way to any political outsider to radicalize the political landscape or to appeal to the masses in order to reshape the entire party system, as it happened in Venezuela or with Morales in Bolivia, or Korea in Ecuador. Nor did it lead to any sort of new policy, the emergence of new political party with the new political platform or viable political alternative, as it happened, for example, in Colombia with Uribe, and to some extent in Paraguay with Fernando Lugo, after reaching power for a brief period between 2008 and 2012. So there was no kind of interruption with the continuity of the old traditional forces, despite the fact that they were all ideologically converged on the center right. So what the three main political parties there, the Democratic Liberation Party, the leaders actually made this shift from the left to the right in the 1990s, and the Dominican Revolutionary Party made its way from the center right to the left with with some sort of alliance with Blanco to deal with the economic crisis in 1981, 1986. And then the Christian Reformist Party that actually represented the right, and with Balaguer reaching power in 1980s, he actually had this pact with the PRD and PLD in order to stabilize or to have this kind of to formalize this ideological convergence on the center right, and to move ahead to carry out these economic reform programs. So what would account for this continuity or stability of the party system comparing to other countries in the region? As I mentioned, it's Morgan's article here in the as it actually one of the assigned reading. She actually argued that it's kind of a mix between continuity of these clientelistic ties with social basis or social constituents, and fragmentation and demobilization of popular sector as well. So the Dominican Republic had, because of Trujillo, the legacy of the authoritarianism in the 60s, he actually created some sort of antagonistic line or some sort of some form of nationalism that triggered and actually that actually it fed into this segregation and mistreatment of Dominican people with Haitian or from like Haiti. They had some Haitian origin. So the actually, because of this heritage of Haiti invasion, and this, the massacre happened, against them under the dictatorship. So this kind of hatred and segregation, it became deeply entrenched, in society, and created this mistreatment and prejudice towards, dark-skinned um, citizens from with Haitian origins. So, and they were widely disenfranchised. So they had like no say, or no kind of sense of political efficacy or political competence to affect the course of political events. So this, like poor people, people with this kind of racist or racial card, um, benefited, the existing, or the incumbents, or the existing, or the well entrenched political class, in order to perpetuate, their dominant position, and prevented, any kind of political outsider or alternative policy program to emerge. So the with this kind of racism or racist card, that continue to demobilize or to fragment or atomize the popular sector, and these kind of clientelistic machine, in order to, you have uh, as a citizen, or as a subject or a social subject, they had to abide by this clientelistic deals. Otherwise, they would be prevented from some sort of the material benefits, or this particular material benefits distributed by traditional order forces. So these the parties, clientelist machines, with the fragmentation and like the depoliticization and disenfranchisement of Haitian or Dominican people, dark-skinned people with Haitian origins. They were totally disenfranchised. And this kind of depoliticization and demobilization led to fragmentation of the popular sector and prevented any sort of collective action, and the emergence, and even like political elites, uh, they were stigmatized because of any kind of connection or Haitian origins. So they were totally, excluded from political dynamics or political process. So this kind of mix between like high barriers of entry to get admitted, to the polity structure, and the fragmentation of popular sector and demobilization of the popular sector of the basically the poor and dark-skinned people. It actually fed into, this process of continuity of the traditional political class and continuity of the traditional political parties, despite the fact that they were ideologically converged on the center right, and they actually eliminated any sort of ideological differentiation between right left dimension. So with this programmatic de-alignment, or this bait and switch, tactic that happened, like some political leaders campaigned on something and offered some electoral promises, but after reaching power, they made, this radical or sudden shift to the other direction, as populist leaders actually campaigned on. Like LaAm, for example, it helped him to implement these economic reform policies, even for and got him re-elected for a second term. But it had like some negative implications or consequences for the Peronist party brand, as we're going to see next lecture. So by this kind of programmatic de-alignment, or this kind of brand dilution, as Lupo mentioned, combined with the fact that poor economic performance, this would account for different trajectories of total collapse of party system, or total like the party breakdown in Venezuela, and some sort of party erosion or slow erosion of party system in Argentina, with the disappearance of the radicals from the political scene, as it happened in Argentina after 2003. but the Peronists actually managed to reach out to non-traditional or non-core constituencies in order to renew the image of the political party and actually re-establish ties with electoral constituencies. So Lupo here, when we focus on Argentina and Venezuela, we need to shift the focus to the voters, the attachment, the partisan attachment, because it's still here like Murillo actually focused on this kind of interaction between macro and micro levels of analysis. Roberts still, like, he focused on the party system as this level of, perhaps it's the meso level of analysis. But in order to speak of like total collapse of or breakdown of party system of political parties, you need to turn the focus, or you need to focus on the attitudes and behavior of voters, because in order to speak of party breakdown, you need to investigate, the electoral volatility, why people actually shifted, or they didn't cast a vote for traditional parties and they shifted to a new outsider or new political alternative. So you need to investigate, the attachment, what happened, with the attitudes and the attachment of voters, in order to break or to detach themselves, with the existing political parties, and to put an end to the traditional or the well-established, political party, the Democratic Action Party, and the the Social Christian Party copy in Venezuela and AD in Venezuela, and then the radicals, the total disappearance of the radicals from the political scene in Argentina. So we'll leave this to next lecture. So we will investigate, in some detail, Venezuela and Argentina, but from the perspective of brand dilution and economic performance perspective. Okay, that's all for today, and see you next time. Bye.